Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I talk with gut expert Vincent Pedre. Vincent is a functional medicine expert with over 20 years of experience in both Western and Eastern medical traditions. Having treated over 10,000 patients, Vincent has a simple yet profound mission to help you transform your health. In this week's episode, expect to learn gut-brain mastery, all about antibiotics, the importance of gut microbiome and intuition, diet culture, stress, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Now, guys, before we start this week's episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about the Life by Design Mastermind. The Life by Design Mastermind is the mastermind for go-getters and high achievers who are looking to create a more successful, fulfilling, and balanced life by design. If you're serious about transforming your life, achieving your goals, and living a life on your terms, then the Life by Design is your golden ticket. Head over to the show notes and click on the link for more details about the program. Dr. Vincent Pedre, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Finally, we've been trying to put this on the books for a while.
We have, and it's been 8 months since we hung out together in Croatia and had a very late night at dinner just talking about life.
That's right. And I got to experience conscious connected breath work. Is that how you call it? Conscious connected.
Yes, that's
the conscious
right.
connected breath.
That's
I
right.
made it there every morning. And I remember the first day, it just wasn't, I felt like, oh, I wasn't quite connecting with it. And then by the third day, you really explained it well. And I had this huge emotional release that day. It just like, when you have those moments that you can't control.
Yep.
And it came with some like vision, insight that was completely unexpected. But who's to say that it wasn't that the previous days kind of led up to that on the third day, being able to feel comfortable enough to have that insight and that catharsis that came with it.
I remember it clearly. It's amazing what you and your breath can do.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that, and that's a lot of what I talk about in the work that I do with the gut and the gut-brain connection, which I'm really passionate about, and just actually creating a course called Gut-Brain Mastery. And I think it's the missing element that the world needs. I think if we could only teach 1 billion people how to breathe, start there. And then if you could teach them the power of the gut-brain connection, like it's transformative.
Yeah. To give the guys some context, can you give a 60, 90-second spiel of who you are and what has got you to where you are today?
I breathe. No, I'm kidding. I breathe for a living. Well, I breathe to stay alive, but I also breathe to control my internal state. And I've been doing this since I was 21 years old. Before I went to medical school, so I'm a doctor, I'm medically trained. I then trained in acupuncture, then I trained in functional medicine. Then from functional medicine, I zeroed in and got focused on gut health. But if you rewind the clock to the beginning, I was 21 years old, getting ready to go to medical school, had already gotten into a medical school, and I was having cold feet. And I suddenly wasn't sure if this is what I wanted to do. The real reason that I was thinking that was not because I've loved science, and I also love the idea of helping people. Like when I was in high school, like we used to go to nursing homes. During college or later on, I'm trying to remember now because the memories start blending. I think it probably was high school. I used to volunteer at the hospital, and I was the person who would wheel people on a wheelchair from one place to another. And I did this because my older sister had volunteered at a hospital. So I really loved the idea of helping people, but I was afraid of needles. So when I was 21 years old and already admitted to medical school, I come home and I tell my parents, I don't know if I want to do this. The real reason was, how can I become a doctor if I'm afraid of needles? Like, I don't like being in the same room with needles. How can a doctor be someone who doesn't like needles? And I would pass out every time. Shot, had my blood taken, I'm out every single time. And it become, the more that it happens, the more that internal trauma builds up. So even as the thought of a needle would already get my heart racing, I would get into a cold sweat, all those symptoms that are vasovagal, as they call them, they're dorsal vagal symptoms. And so my parents sat me down and they're like, no, you're going to become a doctor. Like, this is not an option. You're going to become a doctor. So we need to figure this out. And there wasn't anything figured out there because my parents didn't have any wisdom or insight into like how I conquered this fear of needles. They're like, you're just going to do it. My dad came from a generation of, you just kind of overpower your mind, like mind over everything. But the thing is, when you really start to understand neuroception, what happens internally doesn't feel like it's under your control, right? It feels like a runaway train. There's a point of no return after it gets going that I know, oh, I'm blacking out. This is it. And it's extremely unpleasant sensation because you start going cold, your limbs start feeling numb and tingly, and then you start seeing like this fading of darkness that comes while your eyes are still open. Everything is turning black, and then before you know it, you're out. And you're waking up as if out of a dream. Usually it was strange. Like a lot of times I would go into some REM sleep and I would wake up not knowing where I was, what had happened. Like for a moment, it would take me a moment to realize, oh, I'm at the doctor's office. I'm not in some island paradise as I was just dreaming. So I'm 21 years old. This is 1995, and I'm trying to figure out, how am I going to become a doctor if I am deathly afraid of needles? How do I like conquer this? And I discover a book called The Relaxation Response, and it talks about breath work. And I think mostly breath work as the entry point to meditation. And it was a doctor from Harvard. He had done studies shown that breath work and meditation can reduce blood pressure, can improve the stress response. And I decided I need to figure out how to control this part of the nervous system that is automatic or autonomic. But finally, I found a book that said this isn't totally out of our control. So even though it's this neuroceptive reflex where there's a pathway that bypasses the mind, your body is just reacting, there is a way to gain control over that and really creating a sense of safety in the body, which is kind of interesting because coming full circle to what I'm doing now with my gut brain mastery program is really all about the vagus nerve and creating safety in the body. So I started training. So imagine like if I was like an athlete, sorry, the light in front of me is so bright. If I was an athlete training for a marathon, I was training to conquer my fear of needles. And it was so serious because I knew that if I didn't do this, then I can't become, in my mind, if I don't conquer this, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm not going to be able to serve people. So it was really like the stakes for me were high. Like I didn't want to disappoint my parents, but most importantly, I didn't want to disappoint myself. Now, looking back, I look at that as one of the greatest gifts that I have ever received, because if I didn't have this fear of needles, I would have gone to medical school without this awakening that happened in 1995, before the world was breathing, doing breath work, before everybody was meditating. I started doing breath work, meditation. Then that led me to yoga because I got curious about yoga. And here I am now doing breath work, meditating, doing yoga right before I start medical school. But the more powerful thing is that I conquered my fear of needles and I stopped passing out. Like you could do this stuff, and if it doesn't give you a result like that, you're probably wondering like, well, how is this helping me? Like, what is it doing? How is it changing my life? Sometimes it's more subtle. When I was in my first year of medical school, everybody always commented on, how are you so calm? And again, it was 1995. So I wasn't like wearing like breath work and meditation on my chest, like a t-shirt, like I do breath work. It was more like, I've got this secret weapon. I'm embarrassed to share this because they're gonna think I'm some hippy dippy, like freaky, like here in medical school, but I'm meditating and doing breath work. So I would just tell them like, yeah, no, this is just how I am. But meanwhile, I would go home after school every day and meditate for like 30 minutes. I was doing guided imagery meditations. And that completely imprinted in me the type of doctor that I would become and the path that my career would take. And I knew that I would never be a regular doctor. And that awakened within me the passion that I feel for teaching people how to heal through the power of the body and nutrition, like eating the right things, healing the gut. Uh, that to me is foundational. So I'm not sure if I told you, kind of told you my story, one of my many stories.
Yeah, yeah. It's what have you noticed personally about your own mind-body connection? Like, how's that evolved over the last 30 years? What do you notice about kind of when you're eating well and looking after your gut? What do you notice for you personally when
Yeah.
you're not looking after yourself so well? Like, what are you seeing from a personal experience?
Well, I can tell you this. It's not one and done. So I did all this training pre that, before I started doing all this breath work meditation and started realizing how it was changing how I felt internally. Because I was good at wearing a mask back then as a child. I could look stoic on the outside, but on the inside, I was a storm. I was this type A, competitive, always worrying, wanting to get the top grade, like typical personality of someone who's going to become a doctor, who has to be in a very competitive field. But by the time I was 21, I knew I didn't like that about me. I didn't like that the inside was completely discordant with the way I wanted to present and be in the world. I wanted to be this calm person. I wanted to be zen and relaxed. And what I did find is that when you do a dedicated amount of time, like there were periods through my last, this was almost 30 years ago. So I can't say I've been meditating and doing breath work perfectly for 30 years. There have been moments in life where I've had breaks for different reasons. The really interesting thing is that I found that when I did a block of several months of this, sometimes even if I went off the wagon because life gets busy, or I just got more into weight training and that was more my thing for a period. But the effects of that work would last for a year, 2 years, 3 years. So it's like I put this big investment in myself. And even if I stopped doing that, there was something that had been completely rewired and changed internally. It wasn't easy for that to go back to where it was. But over time, life stressors, other things, little by little chips away at that. And then you can find yourself back into that anxious, worrying, and you realize that this is an ongoing journey. This is not like, oh, you do it for this amount of time and then you're done. It's kind of like, the whole diet mentality versus a lifestyle. Like you think if you diet just for a month that you fix the next 12 months. You don't exactly. You've got to look at it as a whole continuum, a lifestyle. Now, there's many ways to live within that, right? You can be on a walk in nature and just be very present and connected and mindful, and that can be a type of meditation, or for me, what I realized, when I was a child, I studied piano for 10 years, and thinking back to how I felt when I used to practice and play for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, you get into this elevated state, almost like an altered state, that now people are, using plant medicines to get there. But we have the ability to get there through our own means, through different things like music, breath work. So I know I feel like went on a runaway again. Did I answer your question, or do you need to reel me back in?
I can't even remember what the question was, but I am interested in what you just said. What?
Oh, yeah, I think you asked, like, are there moments like, how was
Oh,
the
for you, that's right. Yeah. So
yeah.
even if you take a look at your own mind, mental health, whatever you want to kind of categorize it as, what's that journey been like for you when it comes to gut health and even kind of mental health or your mind?
Yeah, so even though I conquered or started rewiring my brain through the breathwork, meditation, yoga, all that when I was in medical school, I still struggled a lot with my gut. And it wouldn't be until over a decade later when I would acquire the knowledge that I needed in order to heal my gut. Because I had suffered from IBS, irritable bowel, for years. By the time I was in my 30s, it had been 2 decades. I was almost at the point where, even though I was already a doctor and I knew what medications could be used to treat, and I had suffered from constipation, like severe constipation at times, to acid reflux, and everybody was taking, like, the H2 blockers, sometimes the PPIs. I knew all these medications existed, but I didn't want that to be my story, but I also didn't know the way out. And so I had struggled with my gut because I was put on 20 plus rounds of antibiotics as a child. Yeah. Destroyed my gut microbiome. Every time I went to the doctor with a sore throat, lung, chest infection, sinuses, antibiotics, antibiotics, antibiotics. That was kind of the way that the doctors practiced back in the 80s and 90s, which is several decades after the discovery of penicillin. It was like a panacea, like, we discovered antibiotics, now we can beat every infection. But we got confused and we started thinking that every infection was bacterial, and most infections are not, respiratory infections. So my immune system was shot. The pediatricians were trying to get me to take these horse pill multivitamins, saying that that's going to fix my immune system. I was rail thin, could not gain any weight. I wasn't absorbing nutrients. I was eating over 3,000 calories a day. Ice cream, sandwiches, pasta, pastries, like, you name it. My mom used to take me to get a vanilla milkshake on the way home from school every day. Little did they know that the milk was actually damaging my gut and was part of the reason that my immune system was so weak. I had leaky gut. I had developed sensitivities to gluten and dairy. And I didn't know this. And it's funny because when I went to college and my constant struggle was gaining weight, I started eating more and more. But when I say eating more and more, I was having more gluten, more dairy. And I did look like I was gaining weight, but if I look back at that, I was puffy. Like, my face was puffy. My body was retaining water because I had leaky gut. Throw in the stress of being a pre-med or stress of life, because stress is like an attack on the gut. Stress also causes alterations in the gut microbiome, on top of the fact that I had been on antibiotics. And there are studies showing that one course of antibiotics already causes the junctions between the cells that line the intestines to start to break down. So antibiotics themselves are the biggest cause for leaky gut. So I had leaky gut, I had food sensitivities, and I suffered from, weak immune system, getting sick all the time, trying to figure all this out. I'd been a hypochondriac until medical school when I started understanding the mechanism of disease that took away my hypochondria, thankfully. But I was still, trying to figure out how can I be healthier, but not having the knowledge or the guidance, and just seeking and seeking. It wasn't until I ran into functional medicine and started training in functional medicine and understanding the gut microbiome that nobody ever, I don't think anybody in all of my medical school mentioned the word microbiome. I hope that they mention it now. I imagine that they do by now. But back then, this is 20 plus years ago, no one talked about the microbiome. There was no concept of how antibiotics, yeah, they save lives, but they also cause damage. And if you take antibiotics, then you've got to clean up the damage that was caused by the antibiotic, especially in your gut, or you're going to develop a whole bunch of potential chronic illnesses later on in life, including autoimmune disease. You just don't know. It depends on your own. Every person has their, unique way that their body reacts to environmental challenges, right? And to me, taking an antibiotic is another challenge that the body needs to overcome. And so I lived with IBS, unpredictable bowels, running to the bathroom sometimes when eating out, like not knowing what was affecting me, completely oblivious to that. Eczema on my hands, so some skin rashes, and mental fog, or feeling sometimes like that feeling of that I talk about in my book, The Gut Smart Protocol, postprandial endotoxemia, where you've got all this endotoxin like coming into your circulation, and it makes you sleepy, makes you kind of feel like you're knocked out. And so I was dealing with all those things and got through medical school, got through my training, but thinking that this is just going to be the way my body is for the rest of my life, just thinking, well, it's just my luck of the draw. I thought of my older sister who had what we call an iron stomach. Like she could eat anything and nothing ever bothered her. And me, I was a canary in the coal mine. Like just one little thing would set me off, and I never knew what it was because I was trying to like everyone, I was trying to fit in and belong. So that meant if everyone was eating fried food, well, I'm going to eat fried food. If everyone's having ice cream, then I'm going to have ice cream. And I don't think I was ready. I think it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of self-understanding and commitment to go against the grain, right? And to this day, like my sisters who know that I'm gluten-free will still offer me things that have gluten. I'm like, I can't eat that, right? Or that I choose not to eat it because I know it's just not gonna sit right. But thankfully, this is what really inspired me to go down the gut health route, was my own over 2-decade journey dealing with my own challenges and thinking that this was going to be a life sentence, and then figuring out that it didn't have to be, and changing my diet, healing my gut, really working on restoring my gut microbiome. And then that led me to work. I just became really fascinated with gut health, started working with patients. I started paying attention more closely to all the people that complained about gut health issues, gut health and migraines, gut and allergies, gut and autoimmune disease, gut and thyroid. Like I started seeing all these correlations, and before I knew it, I just kept getting referred. Patients wanted to work with me this way. And I thought, wow, like I need to write a book about this. Like it's my story, but it's also like this is affecting the world. Like there's so many people out there who are sick and dealing with this stuff. And we can talk about like the macro, the the macro events in human history that are basically causing this explosion of gut health issues worldwide, not just in the US, but everywhere. And so that's what inspired me to write my first book, and that was Happy Gut. And then that led to just becoming known as a gut expert. And here, my second book, The Gut Smart Protocol, that came out last year, just a few months before we met. And just realized like this is my passion. And now the gut-brain connection, because I think that that's where everything is at. And it brings me full circle back to the beginning where I started, and the importance of rewiring our brain and what I call an operating system upgrade. You know, just like your iPhone needs an operating system upgrade, like I think that sometimes we've got to get to a point where we realize, okay, the way you're doing things, and this is like me talking to myself, the way you're doing things is not working. So if you keep trying the same thing over and over and it's not working, then maybe it's time for an upgrade. You've got to redefine the background processes, redefine how you're eating, how you're living, how you're, approaching every aspect of your life. And over the last 30 years, since I first started meditating and doing breath work, I've changed what I do depending on what my body and what my spirit, what my being requires at the moment. So even the type of breath work that I do changes. The type of meditation that I do changes. Because we probably think like, oh, there's just one meditation or there's just one breath work. No, there's many tools out there, and you've got to make it your own. And I've always been very intuitive about that, listening to what is it that my body needs in the moment. And also it prevents you from becoming bored. I can't imagine doing the same breathwork routine for 10 years in a row, but every once in a while I switch it up. I decide to do something new. I try something different, or my body is asking for, box breathing or breath or breathing with breath holds, like very long breath holds. Like it changes. And by listening to your body, then you're basically in a dance with your body, right? And the best way to flow through that dance is to be intuitive.
I find that fascinating and heavily underestimated, the importance of having that kind of level of intuition to your body. Where do we go wrong with that? Because I think most people, like I think of food, if people could be more aware of what's going on in their body and have a level of intuition, exactly as you said, that kind of nourishing of what you need in that moment. Like most people don't have that level of intuition. So where do you think we're going wrong in terms of the disconnection from self?
At so many levels, we're disconnected from where our food comes from. Everything is packaged, processed, made convenient, to the point that there's a loss of appreciation of the process of making food. Like I was talking to a patient yesterday who's Persian, and I was explaining to them how raw almonds can be pretty horrible for your gut, because raw almonds have lectins and they've got enzyme inhibitors, the phytic acid. So they disrupt your digestive process. And he started telling me how his mom, who's from Persia, that she would soak, sprout, then roast the nuts. But at some point, he did that, and then he just got, let's just say, quote unquote, lazy, or just, we're just part of this convenience lifestyle where, it's going to take a little bit more work. The world that his mom came from is a world that appreciated slowness, that appreciated that sometimes things take a while. We are not in a slow world anymore. There's no appreciation for slowness. What is rewarded is quickness, is convenience, is availability. But as they say, good things come to those who wait, right? That was I think that was like it was either a ketchup commercial or a chocolate commercial, one of the two. The good things, I think it was a ketchup commercial and the bottle's upside down and you're waiting for the ketchup to
Yeah,
come
yeah,
out.
yeah.
And good things come to those who wait. Well, better things for your health sometimes take some waiting, like fermentation, soaking and sprouting nuts, then roasting them. And I was amazed that his mom, just think this is a prior generation. So this is wisdom handed down through generations, right? Not necessarily based on science that didn't exist back then, just based on humans being intuitive and figuring out what they realized felt best for their bodies, and thus had evolved this way of preparing foods. Like in South America, like they soak their quinoa and then they rinse it and then it's cooked with fresh water and eaten. But I challenge you, if you go and you buy pre-made quinoa, it's not going to have been soaked and then rinsed. So there's this ancient wisdom on how to prepare food that I think is getting lost in our modern ways. And unfortunately, as a result, we're becoming sicker and sicker. And I think that's part of the problem, is this quick fix society. And the people are really realizing that it's not working are the ones who put in the work and either change their diet, they commit themselves. Like I've had so many patients tell me, I tried meditation, but it didn't work for me. Or I tried this diet, but it didn't work for me. So I'm like, well, how many times did you meditate? Oh, I tried it once. I'm like, really? So if you go to the gym and you lift weights once, you think you're going to be stronger? Or if you just train one day, you run 1 mile, you think you're going to be able to run a marathon? Like, and yet we translate these things like we don't want to put effort into things. And that has been one of the most challenging things that I had to teach my son. If you think of I think it's Gen X, they grew up with smartphones, iPads, everything is a convenience, social media, everything looks beautiful, everything's perfect, it doesn't take any effort. Teaching him that life, there are a lot of things that take a lot of effort and dedication and consistency, that took me years. He wanted just to be able to go to the gym and just be built and muscular. I'm like, no, you have to keep going. And you go again, and you're consistent, and you just keep doing it. And then you have to eat right, and you have to make sure you're getting enough protein. That wasn't intuitive. And I thought that by leading us by example, being his dad, that would be enough. But this new generation is just being swarmed so much from social media, their peers, that there's sadly this loss of appreciation for what it takes to get anything in life. And that's the thing, when you're unhealthy, I think sometimes you have to hit that point where it's just rock bottom. And then you'll do anything, and you'll do it for long enough. So the thing that I find, and I'm sure you find as a coach, and I consider myself kind of like a body whisperer slash coach, and helping people understand what their bodies are saying to them. A lot of it is just like cheering them on and telling them, yeah, keep going. Yeah, don't stop. You're not there yet. Keep going. Stay positive. Keep the vision.
If you were to design a standard protocol amongst everyone when it comes to gut health, knowing that obviously everyone's different, everyone's got the kind of thing that's going on, like where would you start? What would be the first step? You obviously spent a lot of time talking about meditation, breath work, good food, but like if it was a step-by-step protocol for the next 3, 6, 12 months, what would
That's what
you recommend?
Yeah, that's what I did with my first book, Happy Gut,
Mm.
the gut care program, cleanse, activate, restore, and enhance. It was sort of a four-step protocol, even though there's a lot of elements that go into each step. And then I took that and refined it with my second book because I realized that not every gut is the same. And I wanted to answer the question like, well, some people are really sick, so they can't eat the same as someone who is just moderately sick or mildly sick in their gut, or it's affecting other elements of their health. So I took that and translated into my new book, The Gut Smart Protocol, where I created a quiz and designed a personalized 14-day protocol or a plan, dietary plan, based on the quiz result. But even with that, there's some general recommendations and starting points. If you take out some of the biggest insiders, the foods that are potentially most damaging to gut health that make up a big part of our food supply, wheat, dairy, soy, corn, legumes, depending on if you have arthritis or joint aches, taking out nightshades as well, you can get really far with that. You can get really far doing a broad elimination diet. And that's part of like cleansing, which is the first step in gut care, is taking out the foods that are basically causing inflammation in the body. The more you can clean out your diet, the better for you in the long term. And also, the more clearly your body is going to be able to tell you how that diet is affecting you, or even just by elimination, showing you how those foods were causing problems. So the biggest challenge when I wrote my first book was creating a protocol that applied to everyone. Because I thought, well, how can I make something that applies to every single person? And I did. It was a big challenge. And I think it was really successful. I got so much great feedback on that. The reason that I wrote the second book is that I decided, I still feel that there are those people out there that are the outliers who need more guidance on how to do this. And that's why I wanted to personalize it with a quiz. But if you ask, like, what are the elements of the protocol? Like, diet is always important, right? The foods that we eat, the way we're sourcing our foods, grass-fed, pasture-raised, making sure it's non-GMO, making sure that all the sourcing of the food is good, organic, if possible, pesticide-free. But the other aspect is rewiring the brain, because you cannot heal a stressed out body. And you can't really out diet, which is really trying to outsmart a stressed out lifestyle. I've had those patients that followed, they're like this type A, like their lives are super stressful, but they're able to organize so well. They eat the right breakfast and take the right supplements, and they eat the right lunch. Their kale salad or whatever it is, but they're eating it super fast while still working at their desk. And then they're going out to dinners every night, and they think they're doing everything right. They go out to dinner and they just order a protein and a vegetable, and yet they still feel horrible. It's because they haven't addressed their stress. They haven't addressed the way that they're living their lives. And you've got to rebalance that autonomic part of the nervous system that I started our conversation with, that was my own struggle of passing out with needles. Not everyone is passing out, but we're all kind of navigating the balance between being in the safe zone versus being in that sympathetic overdrive versus being in the deactivated zone, which is when you're withdrawn, you don't want to do anything, you don't want social interactions, you're depressed. And people rotate through those things. And I think what most people are lacking is getting into that safe space, which is the ventral vagal activation. So I think that is a really important piece of it is creating a sense of safety for the body, because then once the body is safe, then it can actually start to, can kind of take a big sigh, like, ah, now I can heal. And rewiring the mind, because you have to change the mindset that got them to where they're at now. So that to me is key. Because anybody can do a diet for 7 days, for 14 days. But if they haven't changed the person that they were, that was going for the donuts, that was eating late at night, like going into their cupboard and snacking, they're not dealing with the underlying reasons where that's coming from and the mindset and the internal programming, then none of it is going to shift. They're just going to do it for a short period of time. And when that trigger arises, they're going to go back into the old pattern because it's what they know. So I think that looking at the big picture, it's very important to put in the mind-body techniques as part of a gut healing protocol.
It's amazing. It still blows my mind. And this is kind of more your space than it is mine. But having spent 15 years in the health and fitness industry, it continues to blow my mind that people aren't aware of the psychological and emotional component of food choices. Like, I don't know how most diets haven't been ruled out and fads haven't been ruled out with just a collective, and I also get it, I'm very aware of how the industry works, but like a collective, this is a psychological component, this is a collective emotional component when it comes to your relationship to food. Are you seeing a positive shift in the right direction when it comes to this, or are we still kind of caught on the surface level fad diet and the merry-go-round that most people are on?
I think that there is an evolving collective consciousness around this, and we see it with the paleo movement, the keto movement, the carnivore diet movement, that people are looking for a solution that works for them. But within that, there's always the financial interest, and then you start seeing all the processed keto bars, and so I think we're always going to have this, because until we start really teaching emotional intelligence to our children, we're not going to create a society that doesn't use different means to escape uncomfortable emotions. And it doesn't have to just be food. It can be a whole bunch of different mechanisms. It can be gambling, it can be being obsessed with sex, like it could be anything. Food happens to be one of the biggest ones, right? So a lot of people reach for sweets or salty, crunchy as their escape, their moment, that me moment at the end of the day that nobody can interrupt. Now I get a time to myself, and I'm just gonna, like, in the words of my patient, I'm not even conscious about what I'm eating. They're just picking just to pick. They're not even hungry at that point. It's just part of this escape. And who knows, it might go back to the reward system when they were kids, and the connection with, the oral sensory system, and that is a way to calm, or depending on if their parents used foods as a way to reward behavior or a way to celebrate, so creating kind of like unhealthy relationships with food, because then it's like, oh, I worked really hard today, so I deserve that cookie, or I deserve to eat this ice cream, even though in the bigger picture, it's not good for them. So I don't know that I think that that's going to be an ongoing battle for the world.
Yeah, and I mean, you spoke to it briefly there as well, which is good for people to understand. I think over the last few years, people have started to join the dots around the importance of following the money if you kind of want to find the truth as to what's going on, and the merry-go-round of the food industry is propped up on a lot of money, and that makes it challenging to get to the truth sometimes as well.
Yeah. And in the end, what's going to be good is always going back to the basics, you know, which was really what people were doing 100 years ago.
Mm.
You know, eating from local farms, grass-fed, minimally processed. That's the best way to eat. And you're not going to go wrong with that. Now, obviously, we're in a complicated world, and we need a lot of different strategies for different types of people. And I focus primarily in creating strategies to heal the gut that can help the greatest amount of people, because to me, the gut is the foundation. That's where the work begins.
Dr. Vincent, it's been great to chat with you, my friend. For those that want to find out more about you, the work you do, your books, all of the above, where's the best spot to send them?
They can go to happygutlife.com. So it's happy gut, G-U-T, life, L-I-F-E.com. They can find out about a lot of the different things that I do there, including my new gut brain mastery. They can also check out gutbrainmastery.com. I'll be intermittently giving free webinars related to the program, and we'll be doing different launches throughout the year. Hopefully that's something that I think the world really needs, because of the high rates of stress, depression, lack of motivation, and also the frightening absence of intuition and self-reflection, which to me is centered around the gut. You know, the gut being the first intuitive brain, even though it's called the second brain, but I think it's our first intuitive brain. You don't go wrong when you listen to your gut. You do go wrong when you listen to your mind.
And your Instagram is extremely informative as well. I've learned so much off that as well. So
so my Instagram at Dr. Pedre.
Awesome. Doc, super insightful and great to catch up with you as well.
Great catching up.